Today, we're covering new filings in the lawsuit from Leah Remini against the Church of Scientology. The stay has been lifted on another civil lawsuit against Scientology and Danny Masterson, but the judge says, be careful what you wish for. And a story of elder abuse from Scientology that is a little personal for me. All of this and more in this week's After Scientology Straight Up and Vertical. Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I go over the week's events as reported on Tony's Substack in the world of Scientology. Welcome back, Tony.
Thank you, Chris.
What a week. Always interesting things happening in the world of Scientology. And it's interesting that there's so much attention on this group that we have daily reporting on it. It's quite good that this much microscope is on this organization. This week we had, first story I wanted to kind of cover with you was the declarations that were issued in Leah's lawsuit from Mike Rinder, Leah Remini, and Claire Headley. What happened there?
Right. So Leah filed her lawsuit on August 2nd. She's suing the Church of Scientology basically for the Fair Game campaign she's been going through. And I've pointed out that in her complaint, she's really good at pointing out specific financial ways that she's being harmed by Scientology's harassment, intimidation, and all that. And she, like I said, she filed it on August 2nd. We're still waiting for Scientology to make some kind of a response, but she's not waiting. She's filed a couple of different things. And the most recent thing, about more than a week ago, she filed this motion for an injunction because she wants the court to understand that Scientology harassment has only increased since she filed her lawsuit. So she wanted to provide some evidence of that, some, exhibits to go along with what she was saying. And so I mentioned when I reported on her motion that there were 3 declarations. But then I thought, more than just mentioning them, I bet people would like to see them because they had some interesting details. So that's what I did this week was I actually published the full text of all 3 of those declarations from Mike Rinder, Claire Headley, and Leah Remini herself. And, real quickly, Claire was saying that this clearly an OSA operative has been harassing the Aftermath Foundation by going to all these different states and claiming that the Aftermath Foundation was not registered properly, basically creating just a big paperwork headache for Claire, which is just a classic Scientology thing to do, to try to do that enough to get them in some trouble. So she detailed that. And then Mike, Mike has been subjected to so much of this private investigator shenanigan nonsense, and it kind of comes and goes. And just recently, he got a bunch of new action, a bunch, silly investigators following him around. And, he pointed out that right now he's not, he's going through a tough time. He's getting treatment for cancer. It's like really, just really disgusting that Scientology would subject him to that kind of thing when he and his wife are driving around town. And then Leah's declaration was again about these attacks online and smearing that she gets. And, I think it's all a lot of interesting, more evidence for the court to look at and say, until this can be litigated, Scientology just needs to knock it off.
Right.
And, I don't know how the judge is going to react to that, Chris. We're still waiting to see any kind of reaction to the lawsuit, a response from Scientology, or a reaction to these motions. But I really am, impressed that Leah's just not waiting around. She just keeps adding and adding to this lawsuit.
Yeah, big time. And it really I think it reinforces your theory that they're going to go after a First Amendment defense of, we said all that, and what about it? Because they keep doing it. Like she keeps filing for, at this point, injunctive relief. She's asking the court, make them stop. And they're not. And Scientology's brazenly continuing all the things that she's detailed in her filings, they're still doing.
That's why I say it's going to be interesting to see how the judge begins to react to all this, because that is a question. What can the judge stop, and what Is he unable to stop?
No.
I'd like to see them argue that out and figure out what can be done about that. Clearly, the use of private investigators is with tax exempt money is so disgusting. But is it illegal? Is it something the court is inclined to step in and stop? I don't know, Chris. I really don't.
Given the fact that, as sick as this logic might be, and I'm not saying that I think any of this is moral or right, the tax exempt money is supposed to be spent in the forwarding of the church's operations. And this is dogmatic behavior for Scientology. And they're now at the point where they're not even trying to hide it. They used to. Now they're just, this is us. Welcome to it. And we have all the legal right we want to do this because we are enacting our religious scriptures, so to speak. I mean, I think it's all bullshit nonsense that they even talk that way. But that's the arguments they'll probably be presenting here based on how they're behaving right now. So
yeah.
Just a scummy organization, because really who acts like that? Criminal organizations act like that. Scumbags act like that. I mean, it just reinforces our whole take that Scientology really is mafia with religious cloaking.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. Now, there was another story I was a little interested in with where a judge did have something to say about the lift on, there was been a stay on the civil case against Masterson and Church of Scientology. This was addressed this week. What happened?
Yeah, so, and it's going to start getting really complicated because we got all these lawsuits going at the same time, and it's going to be tough to keep track of them. But that particular lawsuit where they were in court this week is the Bixler v. Scientology lawsuit. That's the one that was filed by Danny Masterson's accusers back in August 2019, almost a year before he was actually charged criminally. And that lawsuit is they're not suing him for the sexual assaults. They are suing Danny and the church for a campaign of harassment, basically fair game. That since they came forward to the LAPD, they say they've been stalked and surveilled and hacked, pets have been poisoned, a house has been set on fire, all these allegations made that they believe has been done by Scientology and Danny Masterson. That lawsuit, however, was put on hold while the criminal trials were going on.
Right.
So now Danny was convicted May 31st. He was sentenced on September 7th, sentenced to 30 years to life. So now the civil suit can get going again, theoretically. And that day in court, the day before, both sides submitted a joint filing to let the judge know where they stood. And the Scientology side said, look, Judge, we think you should keep it on ice because Danny still has Fifth Amendment protection as he's appealing his convictions, so you can't compel him to be deposed or anything like that. And also Scientology has convinced the LAPD to actually investigate these detectives based on stuff they got in the leak from Tom Mesereau and Sharon Applebaum of prosecution evidence in the criminal case, which is just outrageous that the LAPD is taking this seriously. And so Scientology was saying, hey, as long as the LAPD is investigating these detectives, we shouldn't, this lawsuit should not go anywhere. And Judge Collier wasn't impressed by that. However, what was interesting was, clearly the Jane Does and their attorneys want this lawsuit to get going so then they can start deposing people and actually see, this is what Scientology's been saying. Scientology's been saying there's no evidence of harassment, but the Jane Does haven't had a chance to enter any yet. They haven't had a chance to interview anybody. So they want to get going. They want to start gathering this evidence and getting documents from Scientology and deposing people. But the judge said it was really interesting. I had somebody there at the courtroom who gave me really good detailed notes and said the judge said something interesting. The judge says, well, be careful what you wish for. And what he meant by that was, yes, he could lift the stay and the lawsuit can get going again and the discovery can get going. That's what discovery is, the word to describe this fact-gathering process of getting documents and depositions and stuff. However, there's a finite time that can go on, and that time will run out.
Okay.
In the meantime, Danny Masterson is going to be appealing his convictions, and the judge pointed out that could take a couple of years. And so if a couple of years goes by, and then finally you can interview Danny Masterson, your time might have run out by then. So do you really want to get the clock going now? So the Jane Doe attorneys were quizzed, and they both said, no, we want to go. Let's go. So the stay was lifted. The lawsuit will start happening again. It's true. Danny can just say, you can't ask me anything. But I still think there's going to be some really interesting evidence. And the other reason why Scientology did not want the lawsuit to go forward was that they said they had just learned that the plaintiffs were working on an amended complaint. And what that means is, they first filed this, like I said, in August 2019. It's been a while. And if you remember, during the trial, they were testifying that they were still going through harassment. So what that suggests is they're going to come up with a new version of the lawsuit.
Yep.
And it's probably going to have these updated allegations of harassment and stalking, which I'm very interested in hearing about. I mean, if they were being stalked while they were testifying in a criminal trial, that amps it up a little bit, Chris, I think. And so I'm looking forward to that. Apparently it's coming. And so I'm going to be checking the docket. I think that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I agree that it's going to become very, very interesting. And I think they're dead on in getting going on this. And my thinking on it right now is that Masterson's a convicted felon now. He's a convicted criminal. He's behind bars. His guilt's not in question as to the sexual assaults, which only lends credibility to their claims that Scientology, we know they covered it up. Now they've been trying to keep it covered up through all this pressure. Yeah. I look at this as Scientology's on the hot seat way more than Masterson is. It's not like Masterson was sitting outside their house. They hired PIs and all the other crap that they do. So Scientology is wide open right now, to have some some spears in the gut. And I would really like to
I know personally, I know about some of that evidence, and it's pretty interesting. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what comes in about this.
Yeah.
There's another thing I do want to bring. Well, the other thing that the judge did that day was set a court date. That's kind of what everybody else is focused on. All the other media has focused on the idea that he set a court date 2 years out in September 2025.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting. But to me, it was a lot more interesting when he said, "Be careful what you wish for." That was more intriguing. But so a couple of years from now, they'll get a trial if it doesn't get moved back even farther than that. So I mean, justice moves pretty slowly. And then the other thing that came out of it, I was going to say there was one other thing. And another thing to keep in mind. So again, this is called the Bixler lawsuit. You'll hear me refer to it that way. It's Bixler v. Scientology. It's the 3 Jane Does that were in a criminal case, a 4th Jane Doe, and a husband of one of the Jane Does. 5 total plaintiffs suing Scientology and the Church of and Danny over harassment.
Right.
That's the Bixler case. What I want to remind people that now that Danny's been convicted, by California law, Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2 can now sue him for raping them. And they have up to a year to file that. So we may end up with Bixler and a Jane Doe 1 rape suit, a Jane Doe 2 rape suit. There's also the Jane Doe 1 lawsuit against Gavin Potter, and there's the Leah Remini lawsuit against David Miscavige and Scientology. So there's a lot of things going on at the same time. And, it's going to be interesting keeping track of it all.
Man. And that's on the California side. Then you have the human rights thing over in Florida, which I guess we'll see.
We're still waiting for the 11th Circuit to decide on that interlocutory appeal. And that's just, you never know how long it's going to take them to do something like that. I check every day. And at some point, they're going to come out with a decision on that. But that's basically on hold.
Okay, got it on that. Let me switch sequence on the next thing I want to bring up, which is, since it relates directly to everything we were just talking about, is your article on the Scoggins, the photos. And there they were, the people I remember, right? I worked not with them, but I knew them. And goddamn, there they are, just like Julian Schwartz. What was that story?
Yeah, so during the second trial, I think I mentioned it several times, that the prosecution was doing a much better job than the first trial as far as visuals was concerned. Right from the start, in the second trial, in their opening statement, they were putting up pictures of the Jane Does. They had more visuals of people like Julian Schwartz and the Scoggins. I mean, it was just it really helped build their narrative. I really feel like the visuals helped a lot. While I was sitting there in the courtroom, I could describe what was going on, but we had no way. You can't take a picture in the courtroom, and I after the trial, I know some of us were trying to get those exhibits. Leah Remini and Yashar Ali got that picture of Julian Schwartz and put that out, and that was great. Because it was stunning to see a picture of him in court. I remember that day. I was like, "Oh, that's what the guy looks like."
Yeah.
And but I also remembered that they had also showed pictures of Miranda and Chris Scoggins, who had, told Jane Doe 3, you can't be raped in a relationship and you can't use the R word. And here's some little figures we want you to demonstrate how if you go against our rules, you're going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
I mean, just insane stuff she was testifying to, that these people were putting her through and punishing her for being a rape victim. And so I wanted to get my hands on those photos. Finally got them, and wanted to show everybody this is who we're talking about. It helps to have a visual. And I'm pretty sure those pictures are pretty old and they probably look a little different. But was it was familiar to you?
Oh yeah, no, I recognize both of them right away. Because I'd worked, I think, at Bridge with Chris Scoggins before he went to CC or something. Somehow I was in the same vicinity as him for a while on the Sea Org. We were all, when you're in LA in the Sea Org, you kind of end up seeing everybody else in the Sea Org. So yeah, that's definitely them. It looks like those are ID card photos or driver's license photos or something.
It could be that's where they came from, right? I'm saying, the prosecution put these up on the screen in the trial, and that made them official court exhibits. And that's how eventually you can get your hands on them.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, psychologically, that was absolutely the right move. Because when you give the narrative to the jury, they can follow the story and they get it. And the first jury didn't get it. And that's, if there was anything we were trying to show, it was that. And these guys did, so there you go on that. And I'm glad that in, like criminal cases like this, where actual crimes are occurring, we need accountability. We need to see who these people are who are doing this stuff. I don't want to pillory every single Scientologist out there. They're not all bad people. But when they're engaging in criminal acts,
absolutely not. And I want to make it clear that, the reason why I'm posting those photos is we have official court testimony,
right,
that this husband-wife team punished a woman for being a rape victim, to the point where Jane Doe 3 was told by them to get Danny's car washed.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
So I'm sorry. I at that point, you get your picture put up.
Oh yeah.
If you're doing stuff like that, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I'm in full agreement. Okay, and also, holy cow, this one really threw me because this involved someone I knew and in fact was on the RPF with. In fact, every person named in the story I know or knew when I was in the Sea Org and on the RPF, and that had to do with this story of elder abuse.
Right. So Mike Rinder at his YouTube channel, did this amazing story this week, 2-part piece with this new whistleblower, Mike Brown, former Sea Org guy, who wanted to tell a story about his mother, Rosemary. Mm-hmm. And after the first part, I happened to notice at Facebook Graham Barry saying, "Yep, that's my client." And at that point, Chris, I got an idea because, I've been trying to show people how Graham Barry has been doing such an amazing job in the last few years as far as helping people get their money back, particularly older people who've been extorted by Scientology. Yeah. He's very good at citing California elder abuse law and scaring the crap out of Scientology. So, I at this point, I'd already published several of the demand. He writes these great demand letters spelling out all the abuse of his clients and then shows them to Scientology. And Scientology says, here's a check. go away,
Yep.
And as soon as I saw him say on Facebook, that's my client, I thought maybe that's what's going on. So I messaged him and said, hey, is there a demand letter? That would be a nice follow-up for me from this great stuff Mike's doing. And sure enough, he sent over this lengthy, incredible demand letter. And Friday morning, I noticed Mike had linked to it. So I scrambled. But I wanted to put it in a readable form where everybody could just, didn't have to follow a link. It's right there. You can read the whole thing. And it's devastating, Chris. I mean, what this woman was put through, the lies she was told, the indoctrination, the way she was extorted, the way she was tricked, and then, of course, the way she's, they're working her to death. So just an incredible story. And I may not have been too explicit. I thought I was fairly explicit, but also the reason why I got that demand letter from Graham is it has already worked. In other words, Scientology wrote the check to prevent a lawsuit. So once again, Graham Barry has helped the next Scientologist, get something from Scientology. And again, I just want to sing his praises because he's doing such an amazing job. So that's at least partly a happy ending. I mean, I understand Rosemary's been through so much that she'll never get back, but at least she's got Graham helping her out with that. But I want to hear what your impression of her was and what you saw, at least part of that story.
Well, I'll tell you straight away. And her picture really brought it all home for me, right? Because remembering, and getting the face and the name, because I was on the RPF with like over 100 people, and I was there for 3 years, and she was there for years after I graduated. And she and other people had come down from Gold or from the INT base, and they weren't going to tell you what they were there for. This isn't prison where we, what you in for? You don't do that shit on the RPF. Nobody says anything. Right. And in fact, even on the RPF, the guys who get busted will sing the praises of INT base and Miscavige and Gold to us lesser folk, to us lower level people who've never been there. It's the most ideal base. It's the most incredible place, right? But if you overhear some of their sessions, they even had their own area where the INT guys were separate from us lower level people because we couldn't hear their auditing confessionals. So we weren't privy to their secrets the same, in terms of their sec checking. But she was, and I mean this just unequivocally, she was one of the sweetest women I have ever met. That's how she stuck with me in my memory, right? When I'm like, oh, Rosemary, oh my God, she was like my grandmother. She was like this very sweet, very small woman. And to find out that after the fact of being RPF'd, which was, everybody there is being unjustly persecuted, then to have every dime sucked out of her the way that it was described, even after getting through an RPF program, the punishment never ends. It really has no bottom. And I was just ecstatic to hear her coming out, to see that statement, to see her son supporting her, to get the money back, and to name the names of the people involved, because I knew them too. When you talked about some of the other people in that story, I was like, yep, I knew them on and off the RPF. And it just doesn't have any bottom. That's the thing you get, when you, especially these stories of child abuse and elder abuse, is you just see Mike Render years ago called it a vulture culture. That is such a perfect description of Scientology.
Right.
So, really nasty stuff. And on a final note, Doug Doring and his memorial. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Scientology memorials for a second. What was this about?
Well, and I got a little pushback from people that were saying, listen, you're saying Scientologists don't get memorials. I personally saw memorials. That may have been a poor choice of words on my part. I'm not saying that Scientologists don't get memorials. I'm saying Scientology as an institution very rarely says anything about some of these big figures who pass away.
Yep.
When another organization might at least say some little, public thing about it. And so over the years, numerous times we have written stories at the Underground Bunker about this important Scientology figure who's died, that Scientology figure who's died, because Scientology itself says nothing. And so it's just, sometimes the only public word said about these people is something written by me at the Underground Bunker, which I don't know, it's kind of sad, Yeah. And a perfect recent example of that was Mitch Brisker making public the idea that Norman Starkey's been dead for 4 years, and Scientology never said a word. So I wrote up a little something about him and who he was. And so, then we find out that Doug Doring has died. And of course, we've been keeping an eye on him for a while, because this is the guy who owned Neopets at one point, and now he's, the head honcho at ABC Mouse, the company that administers that, called Age of Learning. And look, there's simply no question that the success of his businesses is why he's been able to donate at least 20 million to the IAS, and another 10 million to the L. Ron Hubbard Hall in Clearwater. Yeah. So yes, that's why I say unequivocally that ABC Mouse, the parents with their monthly sign up for their toddlers to learn to read and write, you have been helping Doug Doring donate millions to David Miscavige. He's, Doring has been one of the, biggest donors of all. Yeah. But now he's died, and he was only like 65. I think he died of cancer or something. And so the question then becomes, is Scientology going to say anything? And I think normally they wouldn't. Yep. Maybe the fact that we publicized it has something to do with them saying publicly. I don't know. But all of a sudden, I got forwarded this flyer that in 2 weeks at the Fort Harrison Hotel, there's going to be some kind of a memorial event for Doug Doring, which I think is a little unusual. And so I was just pointing that out, that it's interesting to me that Scientology is going to do something. I'm sure it'll be closed to the public. I'm sure it'll just be at the Fort Harrison and only Scientologists can attend. But I think that is interesting. And then some of my readers are suggesting that maybe doing an event like that has something to do with keeping the rest of the family in, keeping the donations coming. And certainly, that could possibly be what's going on, possibly. But, Doug Doring's getting a little bit of an event at the Fort Harrison, and he certainly deserves one when you think about how much ABC Mouse money he's given Dave over the years.
Well, I'll say, from my perspective, that's why. Because, let's be real, right? Who's important to David Miscavige? Well, according to many people, all the way up to Mitch Brisker recently, he's constantly got his attention. Miscavige constantly has his attention on the donors, on the whales. Where are they at? Are they happy? Are they happy with what's going on? Is the smoke and mirrors working on them? And if it is, everything's groovy, right? And if it's not so good. So when a major one dies, well, this person clearly was in circles with other Scientology whales. And so we can't just ignore that fact, especially because it was unexpected. So that's my thinking on that, at least. As opposed to a Norman Starkey, who cares? Nobody knows about the guy. He's been up at base for years. Screw that guy, right? He only worked under L. Ron Hubbard. He was only been a loyal Scientology Sea Org member for 3 decades. Fuck that guy, right? Anyway, just being a little callous there, but that's kind of how it is in that world. All right. Well, Tony, thank you very much for joining me this week to talk about all this stuff. Can't help but ask, what do we got coming up this week?
There's some people who want to tell their story, and they're a little nervous about it. So that's kind of what I've been dealing with. I can't tell you anything more about them, but I'm just hoping that they, got to give them time, got to give them space. It's not the easiest thing to decide to come forward, but interesting people. I hopefully that pays off soon, and they decide to come forward. We'll see.
Excellent. Well, I will always encourage people to do so. Having done it myself and having helped other people do it, it helps. There's catharsis there. So let me just put that there for them. Okay. So that all being said, please do make sure you are following Tony's Substack. The address is right on the screen in front of you. And of course that you are subscribed to this channel. Like and share the video, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.